In this video, we'll continue our discussion of some basic terminology and basic concepts related to anatomy and physiology. We're going to take a look at anatomical planes. We'll then take a look at two systems of identifying abdominal regions. We'll review the levels of organization, and then we'll do a quick overview of the 11 organ systems. So let's start by looking at anatomical planes. Think of a plane very simply as a cut that we would make if we were doing dissection. Let's say we had a cadaver, and after we looked at the outside of the body we wanted to go in, we would make cuts. So think of a plane very simply as a cut. I put down here as a definition, a plane is an imaginary flat surface that passes through the body. So if we take a look at the picture over here, we could see three flat surfaces, or like pieces of glass. The blue one that goes front to back this way is actually cutting this model into a left and right side. That's one plane. This more purple one is cutting the model into a front and back. And then the green plane right here is cutting her into a top and bottom. Right? So this is what we would call a plane. Now, the pieces that are left over that we're going to look at, these are known as a section. Right? So a section is one of two pieces that results when the body is cut by the plane that passes through it. Let's take a look at the first plane. This is known as the sagittal plane. So again, this would be the blue glass kind of going straight up and down here. Well, actually, I'll show you here. The blue glass going through the model so that it divides her into a left and right side. And that's the definition of a sagittal plane. It divides a body or an organ into left and right sides. When we look at this plane, this is the picture here of the sagittal plane, this section that's left over, we can see certain things from this plane. For instance, right here we would see the brain. We could see some of the nasal cavity. Here's the tongue in the oral cavity. We can see part of the trachea and the esophagus over here. In the thorax, we could pick the heart up right here. In the abdominal cavity, we could pick these tubes right here are intestines. We can get the liver up here, the stomach, some intestines. Here we can see her uterus, bladder, rectum. So by cutting her in this sagittal plane, we're able to see all these organs from this perspective. There are two types of sagittal planes. The first one is known as a mid-sagittal plane. Very simply, if we made the cut and it produced equal halves, equal sections on both sides, then we would call it a mid-sagittal plane. If we make cuts that are not equal, then we would call them parasagittal. Okay, so again, the main thing you should walk away with this slide is that a sagittal plane divides our body or organ into a right and left side. The second plane we want to take a look at, now this one has two names. You can call it frontal, or other people also call it coronal, so you should know both. We use them interchangeably. That would be in here now. So this purple glass right here, if we kind of slid it down through this model, it would divide her into a front, which is the anterior, and a back piece, which is posterior. And that's the definition of the frontal or the coronal plane. It divides the body or an organ into front, which would be anterior, and back portions. So now when we look at the image here, we could see some of the same things we saw on the sagittal plane, but from a different perspective. For instance, we can see her brain now. This is what it looks like compared to what we saw before. We don't see too much of the facial features as far as the nasal cavity or the oral cavity. We do pick up some of the structures in the neck like the trachea. We can see the heart again, but this time we can pick up the lungs. We didn't see that on the previous section. We can see the liver and the stomach. We can see the intestines. They look a little bit different this time. Right? So we're seeing all the same organs, but from a different perspective. Right? The bladder would be over here. And now this time we're actually seeing parts of the lower limb and the upper limb. In the sagittal plane, they were invisible because we had cut right down the middle. So again, we're seeing a lot of the same organs plus some additional structures based on this cut. Same patient or individual, but seeing different things. All right, so this is going to be our frontal or coronal. The last plane we can call transverse or horizontal. You do even hear terms called cross-sectional, right? So all three of these would be correct. Here, that would be this green glass here. If we put it through this individual here, it's going to cut through her, looks like her forearm, her pelvis, and then the other forearm over here. So we could actually see forearm, forearm, and then this would be through her pelvis. So the transverse or horizontal plane divides the body, again, or an organ, into an upper or and lower portions, right? Upper and lower portions. Going to divide it into upper and lower portions. So those are our planes and the sections. As you go through your studies and you look at different pictures and models, try to figure out what plane was used to give us that image. Before we move on, this is just another example of taking one brain but doing three different planes and showing that we by cutting it different ways we can see different structures. So here's the brain. We'll learn more about this later in the semester. Right, this is the front part, this is the back part over here. But when we cut it in a horizontal or transverse plane, this is what it would look like. We would see some white matter in here. This is some gray matter. There's some cavities in here. These are things we're going to talk about later in the term. But this is all what it looks like on a horizontal plane. Take that same brain, but cut it so that there's an anterior and posterior portion. Here's the plane going through. This is the frontal plane or the coronal plane. Again, we can see the white and the gray matter, but it looks different than the picture above. All right, so same brain giving us a different perspective. And then on the bottom is a mid-sagittal plane. So mid tells you that it's running down the middle. Here they cut the brain in half so that there's a left side and a right side. And we could see again different structures here. Again, we don't want to get into what they are now. It's a little bit beyond where we are, but just to kind of give you the idea, right? Same brain, three different cuts gives us three different perspectives. The next topic we want to take a look at are the abdominal regions. So there's two systems, again, depending on what hospital you work at or where you do your clinicals. They may use one or the other or both for that matter. So I want to show you both systems. The first system is known as the abdominopelvic quadrants. Right? So if you know that quad means four, it's very simple. Here they take a line and they draw it right down the middle of the abdomen this way, through the umbilicus, and then they take a line and they go across and they draw a second line through the umbilicus. So now we have four boxes. So the first box we'll do up here is the left upper quadrant. Things like the stomach would be in here, the spleen. So somebody has a gastritis, right? They may have pain in this region. Then we'll go over this way. To the right, this is the right upper quadrant. This is where the liver is, the gallbladder, and so somebody maybe with a hepatitis may have some right upper quadrant pain. If we drop down, this is the right lower quadrant. Most of this is intestines here. This happens to be a male, so this would be intestines in here. Maybe if he had appendicitis, they would have pain down over here. If this was a female, though, the ovaries would be in here and the fallopian tube, so maybe an ectopic pregnancy may show up over here. All right, so this is the right lower quadrant. On this side would be the left lower quadrant. Again, both in males and females. This is predominantly intestine, so some type of intestinal problem. Again, if it was a female, the other ovary would be in here and the fallopian tube. That would be the left lower quadrant. Okay, so if you kind of go around kind of counterclockwise, left upper quadrant, right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. All right, so this is a nice, easy system. The next system you can see is a little bit more complex. So this we're going to call abdominopelvic regions. And it turns out there's going to be 9 boxes. So what they did here, they dropped 2 lines down, just about mid-clavicular. If you kind of follow right up to the clavicle here, collarbone, and we draw a line down this way, and then on the other side we draw a line down over here. Those would be the two vertical lines, and then there's a horizontal line going above the umbilicus and a horizontal line below the umbilicus. Again, the umbilicus being where the belly button is. So that gives us 9 boxes. The top 3 boxes here, we'll do those first. On the sides, we have the left, and again, it's always the patient's. I meant to say that on the previous slide, not your left or right, it's the patient's left or right. So this would be his left hypochondriac region, right hypochondriac region. So right about here, this is the abdomen, but it's under some of the ribs right here. So if you kind of felt on yourself, you can feel your ribs off to the side. The abdomen under those ribs would be the hypochondriac regions. Again, over here, liver, gallbladder. On this side, this would be like the spleen would be in here. Right in between, this is a really important clinical area. This is known as the epigastric area. A lot of times people that have gallbladder, if they have excuse me, if they have pancreas, that's a real big one. They'll have really severe pain like right in here. So this would be the epigastric region. The middle 3 layers we're going to call lumbar, left and right lumbar, and then in the middle is going to be the umbilical. So why do they call this lumbar? If you took your thumbs and put it on your low back and then bring your fingers forward, you'd be right on this region here. So it's kind of in line with the lumbar spine. So this would be the left lumbar, the right lumbar region, and then right in the middle would be the umbilical region. Right, again, so over here there's mostly intestines, maybe some kidney pain could be over here, intestines over here, and then umbilical pain, again, mostly in here would be small intestine. Sometimes when people have appendicitis, the pain starts here and then it migrates down to the right, so that would be a common thing also. Left lumbar, right lumbar, umbilical. The lower 3 regions, this would be the left inguinal. Maybe from the previous lab or the previous video, this was the inguinal region. This would be the right inguinal. And then in the middle, this would be the hypogastric region. Some people call it the pubic region. Since it's the front of the pelvis, it's known as the pubic region. So again, on the sides, mostly intestines over here for a male, so some type of intestinal problem. Maybe kidney can refer down over here. In a female, the fallopian tube or the ovary can be down over here. And then in the middle, the hypogastric region, let's say the bladder. The bladder would be right behind here. Somebody had a UTI, a bladder infection. That would be a pain right there. So you can see this is much more extensive. All right, so just to recap, the top 3 will have the left and right hypochondriac regions, and then the epigastric in the middle. In the middle, the left and right lumbar region with the umbilical in the middle. And then finally at the bottom, the left inguinal, the right inguinal, and then the hypogastric, or you could also say the pubic region, would be in the middle. So let's finish up this video taking a look at the levels of organization and just a quick overview of the 11 body systems. So this is something you may have gone over in lecture, so I just want to go over it quickly. We study anatomy from simple to complex. So the simplest level is known as the chemical level. Now, you may hear it called the molecular level, but this is all the chemicals that we need to sustain life, right? You may have heard of water, obviously, carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, proteins, nucleic acids. All of these make up the chemical level, and these are things we're going to study more detail in lecture. Now, if we take all the chemicals of the body here and we put them together, that's now going to form the next level of organization up, known as the cellular level. Right? The cell is going to be the basic unit of the organism. So here the cell happens to be a heart cell that they're showing you in this image right here. It happens to be a heart cell that's formed by the different chemicals. If we take cells and we put them together, that's going to form the next level of organization known as the tissue level, right? And we're going to study over this semester 4 primary tissues. We're going to study epithelial tissue, we're going to study connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Right, so here this happens to be muscle tissue because again this is going to be heart cells. So here notice it's not just one heart cell, it's joined to another heart cell, and it's joined to another heart cell, and here's another heart cell. So all these heart cells are connected together, and that's making our muscle tissue in this example. If we take the 4 tissues and we put them together, now we're going to create the next level of organization called the organ level. So here again you can see the heart muscle is going to make part of the organ. This organ would also have some epithelium in it. It's going to have nervous tissue in it, connective tissue. So most organs in the body have all 4 tissue types. All right, so here's going to be the organ level. If we take organs that share function, we then create the next system known as the organ system. Right, so we take organs that are associated with the heart, maybe the blood and the blood vessels, and we put them together. We now get the system which would be called the cardiovascular system. So here they're actually showing you the heart in combination with the blood vessels, and then inside there they're not showing it would be the blood. So all of those structures form this system known as the cardiovascular system. We'll see in a moment there's actually 11 organ systems. I'll just kind of go over them real quickly. Now, if we take the 11 organ systems and we put them together and they all function together, that's going to create the highest level of organization. We're going to call that the organism, and that would be this woman over here. So she has her cardiovascular system functioning in here along with the other 10 organ systems. All right, so this is what we refer to as the levels of organization. So there are 11 organ systems. The first system is known, that we just want to review, is known as the integumentary system. This consists mostly of our skin, right? Sometimes that's called the cutaneous membrane. All of the hair on our body, all of the glands that are on in the skin, things like sweat glands, our oil glands, and it also includes our fingernails and our toenails, right? One of the biggest functions of the integumentary system is really to protect us, right? The hair, the skin, right, keeps all microbes and chemicals outside of our body. The integumentary system also helps to regulate our body temperature, and each part of our skin has nerve endings that sense what's happening around us. All right, so that would be the integument. The second system is known as the skeletal system. This consists of, again, of our bones, cartilage, ligaments that hold bones together, and then inside the bones is actually something that makes our blood, called the bone marrow. All right, so the main function of the skeletal system is to protect. So if you think about the cranial vault is protecting our brain, our thoracic cage, right? The ribs are protecting the heart and the lungs, our pelvic cavity is protecting our reproductive organs and that type of thing. Our skeletal system, we're going to see later in the semester, stores calcium, and the bone marrow will help to make our blood cells. Another system that we're going to do is the muscular system, and this consists of all the skeletal muscles and the tendons, right? The function of a tendon is to attach the muscle to a bone. So the muscular system predominantly is going to provide movement. It's going to provide protection and support. Even like our abdominal muscles help to support all of our organs on the inside, right? If we didn't have these abdominal muscles or the pelvic floor muscles, right, we wouldn't be able to keep our organs inside. They would fall out. And muscles also produce heat to generate body temperature, right? And you know that if you go to work out and you start contracting your muscles on the treadmill or the elliptical, right, you start to get hot. That's because the muscles are contracting and they're producing heat. The next system we're going to do is the nervous system. Right? So this consists of the brain, the spinal cord, all of the nerves that are bringing information to and from the body to the brain and spinal cord, and then all of our sense organs. So the function of the nervous system is quite complex. It's actually going to direct immediate responses to the stimuli, right? If you touch something hot, you don't just continue to touch it, right? You pull away from it, right? That's something that's controlled by our nervous system. It coordinates our movements. It even helps to interpret all the information. Even this video, you're listening to me talk and you're watching these images, right? Your brain is trying to process all this information, right? Without our nervous system, we wouldn't be able to do that. So these four systems, integument, skeletal, muscular, and the nervous, these are the systems that we do in Anatomy 1. In Anatomy 2, we do the remaining 7 systems. All right, they're going to include the endocrine system. So some of the major organs here are going to be the pituitary gland, thyroid gland, the pancreas, our adrenals, the ovaries and the testes, and even endocrine tissues and other systems. This is crazy, but we're going to see that the heart produces hormones. The kidneys produce hormones. So we don't typically think of them as endocrine organs, but we do have different organs that can produce hormones also. All right, so hormones and the endocrine system actually work with the nervous system to control things. So the functions of the endocrine system is to direct long-term changes in the activities of the other organ systems. Right? So our hormones are controlling our other organ systems. Even if you think about you maturing, going through puberty and your changes as you went from a child to an adult, right? That was all the hormones controlling all of our organ systems. We have hormones that adjust metabolic activity, how fast your chemical reactions take place, and it controls even reproduction. If you think of the female has the menstrual cycle, the ovarian cycle, males produce testosterone. Without those hormones, we would not be able to reproduce. The next system that you'll take a look at in A&P2 is the cardiovascular system. Right? That includes the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood that's flowing within. The functions, generally the cardiovascular system is distributing the blood and all the things that are dissolved in the blood throughout the body, even waste products that we're gonna eliminate. And it also functions to distribute heat throughout our body. All right, so that's the cardiovascular system. The last couple systems that are done in A&P2 are going to be the lymphatic system. This includes the spleen, a gland underneath your sternum or your breastbone known as the thymus, lymph nodes, lymph vessels, tonsils that are in our throat area. Think of the lymphatic system as predominantly a protective system, right? It's going to defend us from infection and disease. The respiratory system. Some of the major organs include the nasal cavities, the sinuses, the larynx, which is your voice box, the trachea, which is our windpipe, right? And then all the tubes that go down and in the lungs are known as the bronchi. Right? The lungs themselves are going to be where gas exchange takes place, and we have these little air sacs in there known as the alveoli. And these are all the organs that we're going to study in the respiratory system. And the major functions of the respiratory system is basically to deliver air down to the alveoli. When we breathe in, the goal is to get that air down to the air sacs so gas exchange can take place. Now we can put oxygen into the bloodstream and we can remove carbon dioxide. The other thing that the respiratory system does for us, it actually allows us to produce sounds for communications. The larynx right over here was the voice box, right? So this is what allows us to speak. The digestive system, right? So some of the major organs, teeth, the tongue, the pharynx, which is the throat, the food tube, which is known as the esophagus, the stomach, our large and small intestines, some accessory organs, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. All of these are necessary for digestive functions. All right, so digestion, as far as its function, or the digestive system, is going to process and digest foods. Once we get those foods down, we want to absorb them. So it's going to help to absorb the nutrients, also to absorb water, right? Water is a big part of our anatomy, we're going to see, even physiology, our function. So we need to have water, and it's going to help to store energy reserves. We'll see organs like the liver can store a form of sugar for us, and some vitamins even. The urinary system, right? Some of the major organs here we're going to see are the kidneys. So we can see the kidneys up here on this woman right up here. Then you can pick up these little tubes coming down towards the bladder right here. Those two tubes are the next one. They're known as the ureters. Then we have the urinary bladder, which is just basically going to store urine. And then the urethra, it's hard to see on this picture, but would be the tube that brings the urine out of the body, right? So we have males and females both have urethras to eliminate the urine. So some of the functions of the urinary system is to excrete waste products, right? Our kidneys are constantly filtering our blood, but we'll see our kidneys also help to control water balance. They help to, the bladder will help to store urine prior to eliminating it, right? We can hold about roughly a liter of urine in the bladder. And then we'll see that the kidneys help to control our pH. Right now, you may not know what that means, but pH is just our acid-base balance. And then all different ions, things like you may have heard of sodium, potassium, calcium. These are all important that they be at a certain level in our bloodstream. And so the kidneys are an important organ as far as regulating that. Finally, the last two systems are reproductive, one for the male, one for the female. So the reproductive system in the male, some of the major organs we'll look at are the testes. The epididymis is a little tube on top of the testes where sperm will mature. The vas deferens, or the ductus deferentia, right here, is the tube that brings the sperm into the male pelvis, where that sperm will now meet with fluids produced by the seminal glands or the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland, to make semen. The penis is going to be shared actually with the urinary system. The urethra in the male penis will eliminate urine, but also during ejaculation will be for sperm elimination. And then the scrotum is where the testes are going to be housed, right? And the testes is where the sperm is produced, and then also the male hormone testosterone. So what's the function of the male reproductive system? It produces the male sex cells, which is the sperm, the seminal fluids, which is the fluid that makes up the semen, and then hormones such as testosterone, and it is also the system for sexual intercourse. Finally, the female reproductive system includes the ovaries, the uterine tubes, right? You may know them as the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the vaginal canal, the labia, which are the kind of the folds of skin that help to protect the reproductive system, the clitoris, which is similar to the male penis from same type of tissue, and then also the breast, which is the mammary glands. So all of these organs we'll study as part of the female reproductive system. Now, the reproductive system produces the female sex cells, which we commonly call the egg, but the technical term is the oocyte, and it produces different hormones. Right? The main female sex hormone is estrogen. During pregnancy, progesterone is important. The uterus helps to mature the embryo, right, to make the fetus. So for 9 months, right, the baby's going to be inside there developing. It provides milk to nourish the newborn. That would be the function of the breast tissue once the baby's born. And then again, same as the male, the reproductive system allows for sexual intercourse.